I can't see what's above. This section that you've got down here,
I mean, I can read through this again. I haven't changed the abstract.
no, not the abstract, down, lower down. The last section that you showed on the browser side was toward a systemic organization, which addresses the ISSS.
Yes.
And what I'm asking is, what about the part about how once the ISSS gets into this more systemic organization, it begins to address the issue of societal.
Yes. Yeah. So we still have the shared community of systems practice for the systemic regeneration of the human societal system. I put a different slant on it though, George. My slant is it's about getting all of the systems organizations working together as essentially a community of practice. We would still have a community of practice, let's say management team or enablement team. Our SIGs would be part of the of that overall system of that community of practice. The SIGs, some of them would continue with their current purposes, assuming we can nail them down in terms of what their objectives are. But we'd also need to put in place additional SIGs as well to address things like the economy, for instance. I think I've not changed the essence of what you were suggesting in terms of the community of practice as an enablement for working groups. But I see those working groups as our SIGs and our evolved SIGs, our additional SIGs, but also the working groups of other organizations and other organizations themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's wonderful. I read your exchange with Peter and whatnot regarding this idea that you had. What I'm wondering though is, do we still have a sense in which we're doing this because not just to make ourselves a more viable organization, but to address the issue of societal resilience?
Yeah.
Because we see that as the calling, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I think that's the recursive part that Peter was referring to, isn't it, Peter?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's just, it's like in all recursions, who's on first and for what purpose? And, I guess my leanings would be, given everything, that responding to, I just think there's two things going on here, and it's great to try and do two things at once in one thing, which I think is a super kind of way if it achieves what you want to achieve. It's just the issue of resilience in relation to the call for papers in that Cambridge, as it's not something we've been involved in the past. More explicitness about in the outline as to the relevance of what we're doing to that call is just, and maybe that's something that we can do after this is completed more completely, because this group will then have a better understanding of its shared understanding of what ISSS, where it's been, where it is now, and where it might go. And in a sense, we are a sort of strategic planning working group in that. At least a documentation group, if not an actual, what you're doing, and I know because I've sent you stuff, pulling together all these thoughts about what ISSS is and where it's going and why it exists in the first place. And I think to get something like that in a contemporary way is great, and to make it public is great too. So, maybe it's making a statement to the UN that's like, hey, we exist, and how transparent we need to be in making that communication is another interesting issue, frankly, because transparency is great. How transparent do you want to be when we're in a period of transition where we know where we want to be, but we know that there's a certain amount of, as you say, what did you call it? Reflection and not chaos, but you use some words up the front there.
Fragmentation of the field.
Yeah, well, I mean, that we'd agree with all of that. But I know you were saying something about what COVID has produced, this reaction to resilience and sustainability or something. You said something.
Yeah.
That's all. I don't know. I mean, that's up for the president and the VP admin to work out what the image of ISSS is going to be going forward as I'm, leaving the stage, as it were.
Yeah. I mean, my take on it was that this particular document was not going to lay out a design for the human societal system, in order for it to be more resilient. But my take on it. So this is my interpretation of what we were doing, and it might not be, the correct interpretation. But my interpretation was that we were essentially laying out our stall, if you like, in terms of how we were going to set up the ISSS as an enabler for evolution of the human societal system. In terms of our contribution, providing a service to the human societal system. And explaining our design, the design of the ISSS, the evolution of the ISSS to achieve that.
I think that's basically correct. I'll have to read through it again and study it. But the notion that I was trying to promote was that the ISSS. Well, let me summarize it. So the ISSS has been going through this questioning of what do we do, how do we do it, how does it fulfill our original mission, and so forth, and realizing that the SIGs were basically becoming silos. And so this re-questioning of what should we do in order to do that. And then along comes the coronavirus. Really put some impetus behind that questioning, because we realize that system science should be able to provide solutions to questions such as how do we structure a society that will have those attributes of sustainability, resilience, stability, so on and so forth. And parallel with that, then I had already been doing all this research for several years using the complex adaptive evolvable system, which was an amalgamation of prior systems theories, centrally, I guess VSM being one of those. And had come to some conclusions and published several papers. And we're writing this up in the book. And so we projected, or that is, I had projected, a type of society, an architecture for society that would have those attributes because it was based on systems principles. That's the claim. But we're not claiming that that's the final solution. What we're claiming is it indicates that there's a possibility to do that, and that system science could in fact be applied to that end. And so what we're looking at is a self-similar process in which the ISSS is going through a regenerative process by analyzing itself in that same way, in order that it become more capable of supporting an effort, a global effort, at doing the same basic kind of thing for society as a whole. So there is that self-similarity, the recursion of process, if you will, that's being implied there. And so it's like fix ourselves before we try to fix society. But we're just using that as evidence that that approach, using system science, would get us a lot further toward a design for a society that would have those capabilities. So
Yeah.
in my mind, that's kind of a strong argument. It's not promoting my particular vision per se, just simply pointing out that it became clear that there was a path that we could take to achieve the ends of regenerating the ISSS, and then allow it to become maybe not a focus, but a nexus for integrating among all the other societies. Now, I should mention quickly, I gave my talk to the Russian conference. Gerald Midgley was, as far as I can tell, the only other American in the group, but there were a lot of Chinese, Russians, obviously, it was all in Russian. But I gave the talk saying, basically, here's the, I sent you guys the slides. I didn't get any response to those. And I have tweaked them since then, so maybe, but basically that's the story I was trying to tell them. And a number of them got fairly excited about that. And as a result, I invited them to join the ISSS, any that wanted to. Now they're economists, they're the systems economy. And so I got one particularly strong one from a woman. She's actually Russian, but she studied and lives and teaches in China. And she's going to be a guest editor for a journal on systems economy, something like that. And she's invited me to write a guest article.
Great.
All came out. So there's quite a bit of interest there in trying to bring the world together to collaborate on this.
Okay, so
can I?
sorry, Rob, you've not said anything yet.
Well, I don't want to take it. Have we finished? Because there's I lost track of this. Is the third or fourth meeting that we've had, and we cover a lot of the same ground about what are the objectives and the two or three or four trajectories or narratives going on here about ISSS or the HSS or the Resilience Conference. I've been quiet a bit because I just wondered if we could spend some time as a group internally talking about the concept of resilience. And I don't know how much it needs to feed into the paper because I've been I'm getting up to speed about how what this paper could be, but my understanding of resilience is pretty basic. It's sort of like the ability to recover from sudden difficulties. So I'm just going to sort of like lay some ground maybe for a discussion around it, if that's all right. And in a way, the ISSS, irrespective of the conversation it's been having for years, even before COVID came along, the ISSS hasn't been impacted, as far as I can tell, much by COVID. It's continuing on as normal. The biggest risk or impact I can see might be the conference being cancelled and the income stream. But I don't know if that means that we're in danger financially. But in terms of business as usual, we're adapting and we're changing. We're doing more Zoom conferences and maybe more Zoom meetings. So I'm trying to understand what the concept of resilience and how it relates to the ISSS, and whether it's a thing that normally, in my mind frame anyway, is just another criteria that you design an organization for. You design a thing for many different reasons, and one of them might be designed for resilience. And I think, as I mentioned before, in a way, ISSS is quite resilient in that its major assets are its digital assets and its history, which will survive and carry on. So that's my sort of opening question really to the group is, what is the concept of resilience here? And I can see it more clearly for society. That's a bigger hit that society is taking. But in terms of the ISSS, and then also coming back to what it is that we want to put in this paper relating to resilience, if at all.
Can I take a quick shot at that, Rob? I think it'd be great. That's a great example of what we should be trying to do. But I want to take it back to the system science basis for that, because resilience tends to mean different things, different people, and so on. Right. In a living system, and particularly in a cultural system, and ISSS is a cultural system, there are at least 3 levels that we talk about as far as a system being able to withstand an impact of some kind. The basic one is homeostasis, the ability to adjust to, some range of a parameter that, well, you know what homeostasis is.
Right.
The second is adaptive response, where a system has an ability to re-regulate its resources to deal with something that is happening and may represent a change for a long period of time. The best example I've ever come up with is when you start weightlifting. You want to become stronger, so you start weightlifting. And what do your muscles do? They eventually begin to grow and develop in order to sustain that increased demand. So that's a biological adaptive response. And you see the same thing in terms of learning theory and so forth. And then finally, the highest level is evolvability, where a system has a capacity to change itself, because this whatever change is occurring is going to be a long-term change. Evolvability is not a very well understood capability for a lot of people, because they think of biological evolution and like that's what you got. But it turns out it's a very, very fundamental second order form of evolution. Pardon me. So what the CAES model does is identify those things that need to happen in a system in order to make it. And so resilience, you're right, is a capacity to address or respond to successfully any major change in the environment that would ordinarily put the system under stress or duress or whatever the case might be. And it be able to then modify its capabilities in order to be more thrivable, and so on. And thereby also gain sustainability. Although there's more to sustainability than just resilience. So that would be my first pass at it, that there's fundamental systems, principles, if you will, that are at work that help us define what resilience is. And then how do we apply that? It's by using those models to identify where, in our case, the ISSS, where it needs to change to meet that. And for society, identify the areas where it needs to change in order to achieve that.
I like that. I like that. Can I throw in another, I think, systemic aspect as well?
Sure.
So the sort of the coupling and decoupling existing within a system, or how tightly it's coupled. So I think the classic example is a crowd, as in not just a chaotic group of people, but an organized crowd, compared to people spread out on a beach. So if an event happens in a crowd, then usually the whole crowd is affected. But if it's loosely coupled, as in spread out on a beach, then if something happens on one part of the beach, it doesn't affect any of the others. So there's, I guess what I'm saying is there's another systemic aspect of the structure and how it is structured to respond to things that go on in it or in its environment. So that's one systemic response. From the world of business, we have things called disaster prevention and recovery plans, so that if something does happen and we do risk assessments and have different scenarios, then we have a plan ready to go. And again, that would have been great for COVID if they'd had that. And we practice these things as well. And we have fail safes and dual servers so that we can switch over and we practice it. And we have quality checks in there to make sure it goes okay. So we actually design for resilience as well. We don't have single points of failure. We have succession plans or more than one person who can deal with these things. So again, that's a design aspect. Architecture, we don't have complex, we try and avoid complex things. We try and have sort of the self-contained, failure-resistant objects that can work together in a service-orientated way. So there's many different design aspects that I think come under the umbrella of designing for resilience that can apply to designs, artifacts, organizations, society as well. And I just wondered if that would be of interest in, you know, a conference on resilience, trying to say these, again, systemic design aspects into you know, and inputting that into the discussion.
Well, I think these are all, everything that you mentioned are examples of either adaptive response or evolvability. And so anything of that nature that you can put in that's, you know, this is a common language. Everybody speaks this language. And so those are good examples that could be used and would, you know, promote the ideas. From my perspective, I like to, you know, start from first principles and then work outward to show here's what we're talking about as it applies to this kind of situation. So when you're talking about having a recovery plan, for example, and the resources to back that plan up if they need to be, you're talking about adaptive response. And that, but at a cultural level or at a societal level, company level.
So where does the concept of conservation and change factor in? Because as far as the ISSS is concerned, I think we'll have to decide what it is that we wish to conserve such that we can still say this is the ISSS. At what point does our society and the HSS evolve to the point where it's no longer considered, well, I guess in the ISSS's situation, it's no longer considered the society it was. And I'm saying this because, as you know, there are some groups of members who very much have a strong idea of what should be conserved in the ISSS, and it forms its identity. That could look different across the membership. And so I don't know where that would factor in terms of our understanding of our idea of what resilience is, but I think it's important, at least as we think about how we wish to reimagine the ISSS.
I take my lessons from biological evolution here. There are certain core things in a living system that have been conserved over the entire history of life. Certain genes which have not really changed all that much over the time that we share with every other living thing. But then all the peripheral stuff is what has changed. Now, in answer to your question about certain members having, you know, things that they think ought to be preserved. This is going to sound crass, but you know what they said about the advancement of science? I can't remember who first said this. Science advances one funeral at a time. So somewhere along the line, I mean, you want to accommodate people because they are people. But on the other hand, you can't let it, destroy what you're trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
And if what you're trying to achieve is not your idea based, but some, as compared to somebody else's idea, but rather a core consensus, something has selected a certain number of features that need to be conserved in your terms. That's not an easy question to answer, I don't think, but again, there's some principled way to approach it.
I think the other thing that's interesting, when I was gathering the material from the ISSS website in terms of, its aims, the purpose of the SIGs, that stuff, there was nothing there that I disagreed with. It was it's in keeping, I think, with what we describe in this report. I think as a society and within our membership, I think we've lost our way. The SIGs aren't doing what the SIGs should be doing. And as an organisation, we're not doing what the organisation has set out to achieve. I think to a large extent, all that we're doing is getting back on track and reminding people what our objectives are and what the SIGs should be doing, because we're failing in our duty to society. That's my feeling. I think that there is a place for all of our existing members, but we do need to get back to what is the identity and the purpose of the ISSS, because I think we've lost our identity, and again that comes across in the feedback from the work on the viable system model and the what is the future of the ISSS. What the people were saying in the working groups at Corvallis. I think again, that validates what I'm saying, I think.
Oh, I mean, I would agree with what you've summarized. Where this is a great, effort to summarize the conversations that have been going on, the surveys we've had, the work that's been done by different people for different reasons. No question. And I think it's fun and challenging to look at as you say, the recursive issues. But I do think too, in a way, what we've been doing is what society is doing as a whole, I suppose, now as a result of COVID. We were doing it. It wasn't as a result of COVID. It was largely at a sort of response to a collective growing consciousness of the state of the society that we were all in. Right? We remember, what does that mean? There are things called SIGs that we just, gaily go along with without questioning why they're there or what their purpose is, or there are people who are nominally chair who do nothing. Is that acceptable? Or don't do, or if they do something, they chair the sessions at the conference, which is all that they're expected to do. And nothing more, which is, fair enough if that's what people accept, anyway, all that. But I think to have a summary document is great. It's just a question of the audience for this and how receptive they are and how appropriate it is for the particular purposes of that conference. And I guess that's my question, really, Gary. I haven't spent enough time looking at that conference, which I will do to give you my opinion about the relevance of this document to that conference, right?
I'd like to follow up though on Rob's point about the discussion of what is resilience, and then some examples as it pertains to that conference.
Right.
I think this is the kind of thing people are going to read about and relate to. I wouldn't expect them to relate directly to the principles of system science that sort of are at base, although I think making reference to them would be important, because that's what our society is supposedly about. So, Rob, I was going to ask you, would you be willing and able to jot down some notes on those ideas, and add sections as you saw fit? But those, I really like the ideas that you were putting out.
Well, I can, as a novice in resilience, I can put down the ideas, that are coming out. But I think that's what I'd encourage, is just that conversation, even if it's just on this one session, just to figure it out, and also feed in, as Peter has sort of mentioned, trying to tune into what the conference and the conference audience would relate to in terms of resilience and the connections, because if there's, we've got to provide some stepping stones or vectors from resilience and why that audience is at that conference to the messages that we're trying to say. And I don't know enough about the conference, and I don't know enough about resilience.
Right, exactly. That's my point. Yeah.
To make those steps.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with an example that just came up by Peter. The SIGs are just off doing whatever they feel like doing. There's no
systemic connection.
Well, not just systemic connection, but even if the SIG were doing, what was contributing to our systemic connection, there's no monitoring of that. There's no feedback. There's no accountability.
Right.
So there's no homeostatic mechanism.
There's no measurement going on.
Nothing.
No measurement process.
Right.
Quality of papers, number of papers, people who belong. I mean, Rob and I have been looking about who's indicated they think they belong. And the next question is perhaps, well, you've indicated you belong. You might have given $5. I mean, even the $5, which was historical, has not been given to the chair to do something with. It's sort of some legacy of some, it's like an appendix, like, it's just hanging on, $5 contribution. For some reason, it hasn't been used by chairs for years, for whatever reason, but it's still in the bylaws, or it's still in the process of registration, and people give money, but there's no accounting for it separately. I mean, the chairs aren't told, oh, you've got $100 in your SIG account to buy chocolate at the conference, or to do whatever. So no, from a systems point of view, as Margaret Mead said, 30 or 40, 50 years ago, why doesn't the organization itself think of itself as a system? And if it did, it would be having some measurement variables, I would imagine, about viability at the SIG level. I mean, so you can talk about resilience in society, human, the HHS, and then ISSS as a subsystem of that, and then the SIGs as one subsystem of the ISSS. But there's no easy viability of, when we did the VSM analysis of the ISSS, we didn't go and look at the other subsystem. Well, we did and we didn't, in a way. We didn't say, well, what's the identity of the SIG? Are they thinking about the future? What are their operations? How are they coordinating their activities? What are the outputs of the SIGs? We didn't go to that level and challenge the chairs or the SIGs themselves, but that would be a possible logical, question to ask. The SIGs is like, please do a VSM analysis of yourself and think about what you output and how do you measure your outputs and your outcomes, and how do you relate to the ISSS as a larger organization. I mean, I don't think the SIGs don't identify themselves as a group anyway. They don't identify themselves as a viable system in themselves, but that would be the logical extension of where you're going, Gary.
Can I jump in to really second that comment about, or re-emphasize the VSM aspect of this, because maybe that's one of the stepping stones that could appear in this paper.
Oh yeah.
Because I'm thinking back to the diagram that of the video that you sent around that Gary and myself and you have been commenting on.
Right. There you
so
go.
much me.
Yeah, perfect. You've
Well,
got it.
that's not it. But what Elena drew up, she drew up five S1s, which I think were sort of conferences, SIGs, systems theory maybe, and the digital library. I can't remember all of them. And maybe if it appears in that diagram in that form, in this paper in that form, then actually some parts of that ISSS VSM are resilient.
Wonderful.
We have a strong identity. I know, there's been some question about what the identity is, but in terms of its history and so on like that, it has a strong identity. The digital library is a strong S1. Maybe the SIGs are not a strong S1. The conferences are a strong or medium S1. We can then start to say there are some good parts to the ISSS and some resilient parts and some parts which are not so resilient.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it looks like Gary's been writing that up, which is wonderful, based on all the materials that we've been making, throwing at him, pulling together in a random way. You're making some
maybe
sense
replace
My
that
only-
VSM model with the one that a similar one to Elena drew, because it was simple enough for this Cambridge conference to understand.
So my only objection is that after making the point that the CAES model is a vastly updated version of VSM, we constantly go back to the old stuff because we got used to it.
Yeah,
and we
yeah.
constantly use that to try to explain things that in modern
It's
experience,
antiquated. Yeah.
it is antiquated. I have nothing but the deepest regard for Stafford beer.
But it is old.
It's old, and I worked through it in my master's degree.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. I mean, in that sense, I'll hold my hand up and I suppose apologize if that's even appropriate. But
No,
it was an attempt when I was president to do something to get some reflective thought going, and I just assembled people that had an expertise on ISSS, and that's where we went with this whole thing.
Yeah,
and,
no, look, I'm simply trying to point out that that if we use this, we ought to at least recognize that there are updated versions that take more things into account than
absolutely we should. No, definitely. And I mean, one of my issues on the whole VSM thing is that it was based on what we knew about neurology 50 years ago, or what Stafford knew about it, and now, as you say, we know so much more about the brain and so much more about my particular interest right now is the vagus nerve system and the whole emotional response that we understand now to the body. I mean, and even the appropriateness of VSM to organizations, that's a whole nother story. Anyway.
Yeah, it's so that's my only objection to going into so much detail on VSM.
Right.
And especially using these really old hand-drawn pictures that's what we did. I mean, terminology, S1, S2, S5, whatever, that's what he came up with at the time. And it took me a long time to figure out how that translated into other terminology that was more common in, you talk about operations, coordination.
Right.
Synergy, strategy, and policy.
I'm a fan of VSM. I think it stood the test of time. If something better or enhanced comes along, I willingly look at it. But I've yet to see something which fully replaces it in any way.
Well, Rob, are you thinking specifically of organizational?
Well, the VSM is meant to apply to complex adaptive systems as well as unitary types of systems.
I understand that. I'll claim that what I've done with the CAES is better because it integrates many more. It's not just about cybernetics, but about a number of different issues that have to do with how a system operates, what you're actually controlling, what the nature of the decisions you're making are, a whole variety of things.
I mean, I would love, George, nothing more than to sort of take take, which has been happening in fits and starts on Saturday, I acknowledge, is to take your CAES and to do what we did to the ISSS with the VSM, to do it with CAS, to sort of, for us to learn about its application in the ways that you're suggesting, or even to society as a whole. And I wonder, one could give some indication of that intent in a paper of this sort and make a suggestion that, this is one way of doing it that has stood the test of time, as Rob said, but that also part of what the ISSS is about is testing these models over and over, and about creating, helping people create new ones that are valid and applicable to what we know now. And I think that in a more directed way, I think is probably where we're going in terms of being resilient. At the moment, it's sort of been left to drift, partly because there isn't any resilient, for want of a better term, memory function or intentionality, in terms of continuous purpose surfacing, which is what Gary is sort of essentially doing. Is like, hey, it's all there. We just haven't paid attention to the purpose of the society properly, perhaps. And that's what we've been establishing over the last 3 or 4 years, is a renewal of that awareness.
Well, in the section on the book, I tried to explain that, there is this new synthesized, amalgamated, and integrated approach that involves us. And I name off all of the different submodels that were brought together to create this new thing. So
I would second, sorry, I just want to second, I would totally agree. I'm more interested in what you're describing now, George, in terms of the bulk of your book, chapters 1 to 14, than the case study of applying that analysis to society to produce an HSS, which is a project, an interesting and vital project in its own right. But it's the analysis of it, which is the core of your book, which is of deep interest and might well be a next step forward. And you have hinted at maybe sort of going through that book at some time or having some courses on it. But yes, I'd second that, and to apply that to the ISSS as well.
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, so in that paragraph, what I was trying to say is here is this newer sort of model, and you can compare it to, so for example, saying the ISSS undertook to do a VSM analysis of the society. Correct me, Peter, but I think I heard you say that no real results came out of that, or
well,
something.
the results is, the results. Real results.
The results are in here.
Yeah, they're in there. That's really what Gary's been doing, and I've been sending him stuff. So there are real results. Yes.
Okay.
Was
well,
there a report written at the time, or is it just we're piecing it together? Okay.
It was a presentation, and what Peter kindly did is he turned the presentation into a script, and then what I then did is I then turned the script into something that was a little bit more formal. Yeah.
Well, I'll have to read it over, but I don't want to. I don't either to the ISSS itself or to this conference paper. I don't want to give, sort of, how to say this. I don't want to make it seem as if there's all kinds of fuzzy stuff going on, or that there's conflicting information and so forth.
No, you're not. That's fine. No, to be clear, I got that group together. We drew that map up. I gave a verbal report as the president's address, and I should probably go and pull that bit out as well, Gary, from what I said. But also, I didn't want to make it just about what this small group did. And when Elena assembled the conversation in Corvallis, they'd had a conversation for a couple of days, which built on the work that we had done as a small group. And that was the report that she gave. And it was also coupled in with some of the conversations about futures, which we were all in. So, to the extent there was a report, it was a verbal report by Elena in that group in Corvallis and by me in the presidential presentation. But no formal report is written.
Okay.
And Gary is doing that now, actually, really.
Okay, so We might have to leave that aside until I've had a chance to read
Yeah.
the work, Gary, and make sure.
Yeah, I mean, the highlights, we thought the strategy is probably in the worst shape in terms of our current activities and capabilities because we don't have a cohesive plan for the future. Yeah, we need to make sure that identity from policy is actually reflecting who we are now and who we're about to become, as opposed to who we're in the past.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
this looks to me like it would be a great recap of what's been done so far.
Yeah.
it is.
I don't think it's
Yeah.
addressing the issue of what needs to be done.
Yeah, no, this is in the section reflecting on the current operations, current
Yeah, I
organisation.
understand.
Yeah, so it's what is the future, yeah, and I think, where did this come from? Oh, this was from the Mike Jackson feedback from the future team. And then there was the analysis of the ISSS using the VSM as a framework, and then there was all the stuff we did on the SIGs. Yeah,
Right. I think it's wonderful work you're doing. I mean,
I do too.
yeah, I mean, God bless you for doing it, Gary, because, you know, it's a fantastic sort of reflective. And I think to put a spin on it for the Resilience Conference, to talk about, you know, reflection as being, you know, in this meta awareness, it's a sort of metacognition. You know, resilience is about metacognition, is understanding where you are, you know, yourself and what you need to change in order to be resilient. So, you know, as an example of a process, old though it may be, whatever, I mean, I think it's great. And but it's not just a process in a kind of strategic planning way. I mean, that on purpose, as we've discussed, it is meant to be about a systemic renewal, you know, and recreation as in light of current circumstances. That is a embodied cognition on an organizational and individual level. So, you know, that's by conscious design, and you only do that through the kind of conversations we're having right now, and we've been having on Saturday mornings, and we had in Corvallis as groups of people. And if there's some way you can have that expression, you know, as a purposeful, intentional activity for renewal, then we're beginning to give people an idea of, you know, a process or processes that can be offered up, and examples of how that might be done, which I think.
I'm going to tell a little story, if I might, and it kind of gets back to the VSM thing. My master's thesis was based on a model-based approach to designing a management information system. And the interesting thing about it was, while I was actually developing this master's thesis, I was getting higher in the ranks of my own company. And the thing that came to light, like we talk about strategies, coming up with strategies and all this kind of stuff. The thing that came to light is you can't actually evolve a system. In this case, I was talking about my company. You can't evolve a system until you stabilize that system. And the key to stabilizing a system was to put in place those feedback loops at the lowest operational level.
Right.
And then you work on the logistics level. And then you work on tactical level. So for the company, this meant managing the inventory, managing the production lines, all that kind of stuff, getting the proper feedback reporting in place, and making sure the managers of those operations understood the nature of the decisions they needed to make. Then at the logistics level, we start talking about the purchasing department. How do you determine when and what to purchase? Now, this was before supply chains as we know them today. So it was still a matter of building inventories against your orders and things of that nature. And then you look at the tactical level. So working with sales and marketing to figure out where you're going to get new customers or how you're going to put stuff out. You look at the shipping department and how they're going to. There's all of these different things that you got to build up from the bottom to make sure they're working as intended. And then you go to the strategic level and say, how do we want this company to evolve? In what direction do we want to go? What new markets do we want to have? And things of that nature. But you have to be sure that the underlying organization is in a position to keep the cash flow going. Then you can start talking about how you want to invest whatever reserves there are, and so on and so forth. So what was mentioned earlier somewhere in the conversation, I don't remember who said it, but taking a look at the SIGs and getting those operational, which means having feedback, having some sort of management plan in place for how the SIGs are gonna operate, and then feeding that into a higher level of coordination. So what am I trying to say? So that the board, for example, knows what's going on in these SIGs. Maybe I don't know. A VP of operations. Too bad Jennifer had to leave. Maybe VP of operations is the right place to get those feedback mechanisms going. But in any case, the point is that we can apply all of those aspects to the organization, not from a strategic level down just yet. And I think this would address Jennifer's question about the conservation. We keep the basic structure that we've got, but we add the information flows that are necessary to stabilize and coordinate everything. Then we'll be in a position to start talking about how do we evolve this system into something new, or where do we need to add the adaptive capabilities for resilience.
Yeah, that's what I was. That's what I was trying to address with the community of practice management team, essentially, George.
Right.
You know, to provide that, I don't know, integration capability across the SIGs, and to take the knowledge that is being researched and developed and collated and placed into the knowledge integration framework.
Well, it sounds like I got some reading to do
Yes.
to catch up on all of that.
Yeah, there's a lot of additional stuff in here now.
I think one thing that's becoming clear though, and I kind of agree with Peter, we're dealing with two documents.
Yeah, I think we are. I think we have to, frankly. And but I think you should finish up what you're doing here from the ISSS point of view, and then we should address the HHS and future. And I mean, I think we need to have something in there about George's approach to perhaps doing a diagnostic using what he's got. And you probably haven't done that anywhere, have you, George? Taken an organization like ISSS and applied your model to a diagnostic?
Well, that's what I was trying to describe about Technetics.
Oh, okay. Well, if you did that, then is that something? I mean, if it was your PhD, but were you using the model that you've developed and you're talking about in your book?
That's where it came from.
Well, have you got? I mean, can you do like a short synopsis from your PhD in a manner similar to what Gary has done for ISSS? Because if you can do that, then we can talk about two instances of reflection for resilience based on two models, and I think that would be really powerful.
Well, I'm in the process of putting together a webinar on the book.
Right. Well, we talked about that, didn't we? Yeah. So that would be well, but I mean, it would be appropriate given that we're in this conversation and Gary's done this work from ISSS and our experience using VSM on ourselves, and we're talking about using it on ourselves. I mean, even to the point of if we can do a rough and ready walk through your model as it applies to ISSS and do the same thing. I don't know, that might be too much to ask at this point. I don't know, Gary, that's, what do you think? That's a lot. I mean, we did that VSM thing real quick. I mean, we did it in, you know, we as you can see, it's a scribble and it was red, green, yellow and blue. I mean, it was, is it working? Is it not working? You know, is it great?
You could do that to HSS as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's what chapter 14, which is not posted, unfortunately.
It's meant to be. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
maybe we can help you write it again. Maybe if we can take, you know, maybe we can do something with the model in the same way as a diagnostic on ISSS.
Well, that's what I'm proposing to do.
Okay. Well, how do we, when do we do that?
Here's the way I would go about doing it. As described before, we put together a small group of people
Right.
who have an intense interest in doing something active.
Right.
And I can run people through
Right.
these webinars.
How many do we need to do?
How many, what do we need to do?
Of your webinars in order to get a handle on the model?
Well, I've got one, an introduction webinar and then one for each part of the book. So there's five total.
That's a
Look,
lot. Yeah.
it
Right.
isn't a simple thing. It's taken me a lifetime to
Oh,
do.
yeah, no, hey, it's the same thing with Stafford. I mean, it took him a lifetime to get to diagnosing the organization because people were saying, well, brain of the firm's great, half the enterprise is great, you know, but come on, what, you know, what do we do next? And so he came up with his little book called Diagnosing the Organization, where the process of, you know, the diagramming and the drawing and so on. And I get it and deeply respect the work you're doing and trying to think of ways to be totally supportive in, you know, and in an accelerated way.
Let me think about how I would simplify it.
Well, pick up, I mean, it's the Diagnosing the Organization book that really, I think, you know, brought this to an operational reality. And maybe there is some, you know, something similar we could take out of your work, and I'll go take another look at I'll take a look at what Gary has done, and I'll look at your latest book again with more of this sort of diagnostic approach in mind and see where we go.
Yeah, maybe, let's see. So in chapter 4, I explained the total process of coming to deep systems understanding.
Right.
Which includes the diagnostic part, the deep analysis, and the knowledge-based structure that you capture everything.
Right.
And then the generation of models and so forth for doing it. And in between chapters, I try to provide some examples of these from a wide variety to show
Right.
that it's universally systemic.
Right.
And in part 3 is where I cover the CAES and the submodels within that integrate all these things I was saying before.
Right.
And then part 4 is applying that to designing, intentionally evolving organizations, and in particular, I'm interested in the human social organization. So what I've been targeting is trying to show how this applies widely to all kinds of systems.
Yeah.
Maybe what I can do is try to consolidate. Essentially, it wasn't my PhD, it was my master's thesis.
Right.
Try to consolidate that and specifically address how you go about doing this for the organization.
I think that would be helpful. I think to do something like Stafford Beer did in that little book might help you finish off chapter 14 by actually saying, you know, we want to look at a microcosm, ISSS, using that model as a diagnostic, and then we'll have additional information. I know that's more work, and I'm conscious that Gary's done a fantastic amount of work this week in his week off. I really do want to acknowledge that, Gary. I'm very touched by the commitment you have to this whole process, not only for ISSS but society, and trying to kill 3 birds with 1 stone. I think it's enormous commitment that you've made.
Hear, hear.
And I'll somehow acknowledge that in whatever public forum needs to be made when we get this finished, because it's helping us all. I mean, it's even helping, I think, if I can be so bold, Gary think about his book. You know, so I look forward to it. Let us know what we can do. I mean, I just bug me, Gary. Just tell me, well, I need this by Monday or something.
The main thing you can do now is really read through what's there,
right,
and give some thought to what we need to do with it next. You know, whether it's using this as a, I don't know, as a common resource, which we then split off into 2 papers. You know, I don't know, but yeah, I think that's what I would really appreciate from you know, the 4 of you now.
Right.
You know, to work out, to look at the content and work out where we go next with this. Yeah.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, we can meet again. We don't need to wait till next Friday. I mean, there's two things that are going on here. One is, you know, George and his book and the diagnostic, and then there's the other is this paper, and it's 2 audiences. One is ISSS, and the other is the Resilience Conference, and how to accelerate that. What is the drop dead date for this Resilience Conference? Remind me again. Do you remind me?
I can't remember, actually.
Okay. Can you do 2 things? Can you, and I apologize, can you send me a link to the conference site again, and also to the Google Doc? Just as you've been reminding me about the meeting. I think if you could just send those 2 links again, and I'll go pick up my iPad and go look at chapter 4 in George's book, and George, you come back to us with how you might like to proceed with an ISSS diagnostic process with people. You know, that doesn't need to be Saturday morning. We could do that any other time.
Okay. What's forming in my mind is another specific set of webinars, maybe not 5 in total, but just an overview of the process, and then specifically on how to do the analysis, what the model is that we're working with, and you know, for the purposes of design.
Right, exactly.
The process by which we can actually implement.
I think that would be fantastic.
Yeah, well, I'm never going to get this book done, you know?
Well, we're trying to help you, actually, I think.
It all helps. It all helps. The most important thing is getting the world set up.
Yeah.
All right. And
okay.
Rob, are you going to tackle writing up some of those examples?
Even just your notes, Rob. I mean, I know you're not an expert on resilience, but I think it would be helpful.
I can put down what I said and some of the examples that people have been coming up with as much as I can remember them.
Fantastic.
Just to have a resilience thread strengthened a bit
yes.
in our discussions.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, right. Time for beer.
Okay, time for beer.
It's still morning here. Oh, well, so what?
Yeah, good time for a beer.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Take care.
See you again soon.
You too. Bye.
I hope that helped. I tell you, working with groups and associations like this is just something else. It's not like working in Airbus where you can say, guys, I need this by Monday morning at 9 o'clock. And if you don't get it, you know, I'm going to have a chat with Fred, you know.
Doesn't work like that either.
No, it doesn't. It used to. It used to, right?
No,
did it?
It's
never like that ever. All right. I'm just totally.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is just like work.
Is it really?
It is. Yeah.
Wow, Jesus. You must be very patient. I have this illusion of accountability. Well, maybe